My father went rigid at the airport when a man in a dark navy suit approached and pressed a thick envelope into his hands, my name printed across the front in bold letters. He couldn't pretend not to see. Derek, my brother, hovered beside him, his face draining of color, trying to look detached even though every muscle in his jaw betrayed him. 4 days earlier, they had laughed while I walked out of my mother's dining room, laughed as Derek looked me directly in the eyes and said, "You're not family. Don't bother showing up." I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply picked up my things and walked out. And now here we were. Everything they'd built shaking apart exactly the way they had shattered me. Before I explain what happened that night, hit like and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Have you ever decided a boundary wasn't up for negotiation anymore? Have you ever stopped erasing lines others kept crossing? I remember that Sunday as if it were supposed to carry meaning. My mother insisted on calling it family dinner, the way she always did. Like repeating the word family would somehow glue together the fractures we all pretended not to see. I spent half the day in my tiny apartment kitchen preparing lasagna layered by layer, brushing garlic butter onto bread I'd set aside specifically for them, picking out a bottle of Merlot I shouldn't have spent money on. It was never about the food. It was my attempt at peace, my way of proving I still cared enough to try. Their house smelled like cinnamon candles and nostalgia, too warm, too curated. The laughter floating from the dining room died instantly the moment I stepped to the doorway. My father looked up from his phone and offered a single stiff nod. My mother greeted me with the same smile she saved for strangers she didn't really want to talk to. And Derek? He leaned back in his chair with that smug, effortless charm he used to hide the truth, that half his success existed because I'd secretly patched up his failures more times than anyone knew. I placed my dishes on the counter, steam fogging the cheap plastic table cover, and waited for someone to shift things around to make space. No one moved. Dinner played out the way it always did. Noise, chaos, conversations that swirled around me without ever touching me. They joked about trips, hotels, plans for the big family reunion in the spring. They talked as if the fourth chair at the table were empty, even though I sat right in it. I nodded where I should, smiled where expected, even though my heartbeat felt loud in my ears. I didn't want an invitation to the reunion. I wanted acknowledgement that my presence mattered. When there was finally a break in the conversation, I kept my voice steady and said, "Just let me know the dates for the reunion. I'll book ahead this time." The words lingered in the air, unwelcome, then dropped to the floor unnoticed. My mother's fork scraped against her plate. Derek didn't bother glancing up. My father cleared his throat and offered more bread, like I'd asked nothing at all. I should have been numb to it by then, the way they managed to erase me without lifting a finger. But something about that moment felt sharper, like breathing thin air. Maybe it was how hard I'd tried to keep my voice soft, or the way my mother kept her eyes locked on her hands rather than looking at me. Maybe I had simply reached the age where you stop mistaking politeness for love. I poured myself a small glass of wine, leaned back, and watched the scene unfold like I wasn't part of it. My brother shining under their attention, my mother stitching quietness into every corner of the house, my father keeping the room aligned with his tone. I reminded myself not to disrupt anything, not to ruin another evening. But deep down, something in me whispered that peace built on silence is just submission wearing makeup. That was the last Sunday I ever tried to earn a place at their table. The silence after my question stretched long enough to feel like a verdict. Then Derek finally looked at me. He tilted his head, that same lazy grin he used whenever he wanted to twist the knife without lifting a hand. "You're not part of this family," he said, clearly. "Don't come." No one flinched. No one objected. The room remained whole while I fractured. My mother hid a smile behind her napkin. My father slapped the table and laughed like Derek had delivered the punchline of a brilliant joke. The sound was bright and cruel, bouncing off the walls until it felt like it was vibrating through my ribs. I stared at the lasagna I had made, still warm, still bubbling, a meal made for people who didn't want me there. Heat rose up my neck. Not anger, but the humiliation of realizing they'd practiced this dynamic for years, and I had been the only one pretending it wasn't real. I didn't speak. I placed my glass down, folded my napkin with deliberate precision, and pushed my chair back slowly. Slowly enough that each second unsettled them. Derek snorted. "Oh, come on, Jenny, can't take a joke?" I lifted my eyes to his. "You meant it." My voice was soft, but it landed. He didn't deny it. None of them did. I grabbed my coat, smoothing the sleeves as my mother's voice trailed behind me, thin and useless. "Jenny, stay, it's just dinner." "No, it's a message. I got it." Outside, the cold hit like a slap, stinging the corners of my eyes. Behind me, the laughter started again, muffled through the door, because silence, even for a moment, was uncomfortable for them. I stood there on the porch, breathing in the freezing air until the shaking in my chest settled. Then I walked to my car, lasagna warm against my palms, untouched. There's a kind of silence that ends things without needing explanation. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry on the drive home. I just moved through the dark streets with the headlights cutting through fog, repeating a single thought over and over. This is the last time I fight to belong where I am only tolerated. The next morning, sunlight broke through my blinds in thin, bright lines, making dust sparkle in the air. My phone sat on the counter, screen blank. No missed calls, no texts, no apology. The silence was louder than if they'd screamed. I drank my coffee and told myself this emptiness was peace. But real peace doesn't feel hollow. It doesn't sit heavy on your chest. It doesn't depend on shrinking yourself small enough to fit someone else's comfort. By the second day, the calm curdled into something brittle. I checked my phone more than I wanted to admit. Still, nothing. They hadn't noticed. Or maybe noticing wasn't the problem. Maybe ignoring me was the intention. On the third night, I left my phone in another room and forced myself not to care. On the fourth morning, the screen finally lit up with a message. I stared at it until the notification blurred. "Derek, hey, weird thing. Did your bank block the transfer? The loan didn't go through." 4 days of silence, and that was the first thing he had to say. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm sorry," just a question about money. Business before blood, as always. I typed 4 words that felt cleaner than any apology could ever feel like. Me, not family, not funded. Then I blocked his number. My hands didn't tremble. Instead, a cold clarity settled in my chest. The kind you feel right before thunder breaks. An hour later, my father texted. I didn't open it. I just turned the phone face down and let it buzz meaninglessly until it stopped. That night, I sat surrounded by years of bank statements, receipts, emergency transfers, every recorded moment of me saving Derek from consequences he should have faced himself. The numbers blurred together, a slow drain of my strength disguised as kindness. 200 here, 500 there, 1,000 when he panicked, more when his business stumbled. I highlighted each transaction one by one. Watching the neon lines glow felt like watching bruises rise to the surface of skin. When I finished, I stacked everything neatly and whispered to the quiet room, "That's done now." Rain tapped against the windows. Steady, cleansing. For once, it didn't sound lonely.
The next day, my phone remained silent. No forced apologies, no fake laughter, no Derek. But I knew how people like them worked. They only panic when the person they drain finally stitches their wounds closed. By evening, the knocking started. Sharp, demanding, escalating. I stayed still. Through the peephole, I saw my father's shoulders hunched forward, Derek pacing like a restless storm beside him. They knocked harder, faster, the sound vibrating through the walls like entitlement turned into rhythm. I wrapped my hands around a mug of tea and stood in the center of my apartment. breathing slowly. They could pound all they wanted. I wasn't opening that door. Eventually, the knocking faded. The SUV engine grumbled to life. Tires crackled over wet pavement as they pulled away. That's when the truth clicked into place. Silence is a mirror. It shows people exactly who they become when they can't use you anymore. When the night finally settled, I looked at the stack of highlighted papers on my table and smiled. Not the happy kind, but the kind that knows something irreversible has begun. 4 days ago, I left their house with nothing. Tonight, I had something better. Boundaries that couldn't be refunded. 3 days later, the envelope showed up at my door. Plain white, my name scrolled in my father's careful handwriting. Inside, $400 in 20s. No note. Just cash. A guilt payment. A hush fee. I stared at it for a long time, then slid it under the table and let it sit there until sunset. When the light turned orange, I picked it up and dropped it in the trash. That small sound, the soft thud of bills hitting plastic, felt cleaner than any apology could. An hour later, my phone buzzed. My father's name lit the screen. I answered on the 4th ring. "Why?" I said before he could speak. He sighed. The practiced kind of sigh that meant I'm about to justify something cruel. "The loan payment failed," he said quickly. "It's a mess. Late fees, supplier issues. We just needed a few days' grace. It's not like we used you, Jenny. Don't take it personally." I laughed once. Quiet. Sharp. "That's the problem. You never did." He said my name again, softer. Like that could fix it. I hung up. After that call, I stopped pretending this was about money. It wasn't. It was about ownership. They built a world where my worth depended on what I gave. Now they were watching it collapse. That night, I opened my banking app. Every emergency transfer, every Venmo, every fever that somehow became a debt. $20,000 over 2 years. I printed every statement until the printer whined in protest. Then I highlighted every transaction tied to Derek. When I was done, the stack glowed yellow, bright enough to see the pattern clearly. The next morning, I packed it all into a manila envelope, wrote on the front, "This is who I've been. Ask yourself who you have been." I dropped it in the post office box and didn't pay for tracking. If it got lost, that meant it had already done its job. By that afternoon, their calls doubled. My mother left voicemails full of tremors that sounded rehearsed. "Things got out of hand, sweetheart. Come for lunch. We'll talk." Then another at midnight. "Family gets through things, Jenny. Derek's under so much pressure." 4 mentions of family in 1 minute, like a spell. On the 5th day, an email came. Subject, repayment plan. It was a spreadsheet. Color-coded. Ridiculous. Derek listed amounts he might start paying back next year. At the bottom, he wrote, "Let's move past this. We're family, right?" I stared at the word family until it blurred. That's when the call came from a number I didn't know. "Ms. Williams?" A calm male voice. "Thomas Reed, Greenlight Legal. We're confirming your co-signature on a $10,000 business loan for Derek William." My pulse stopped. "Excuse me?" "It appears your signature's on the document," he said. "We're verifying before processing." I never signed anything. A pause. "We've noticed inconsistencies. You won't be held liable. We'll be in touch." When the call ended, I just sat there, staring at the wall. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from clarity. They hadn't just taken my money. They'd taken my name. I called a lawyer I knew from work, Miss Parson. Her voice was steady, sharp. "This isn't misunderstanding. It's identity fraud. Stay calm. Document everything. We'll handle it quietly." That word quietly made sense. People like them thrived on chaos. Silence was how you beat them. So I documented everything. Every voicemail, every forged bill, every payment I'd made in good faith. I labeled the folder paper cuts.
small wounds that finally bled the truth. The next morning, my lawyer sent the cease and desist letter to Derek's business address. 2 hours later, I got an email from him. "You think you're better than us now? You'll regret this." I didn't reply. Instead, I drove to Grandma's cottage, the only place that ever felt safe. She opened the door before I knocked. "Took you long enough?" she said. Her voice didn't need to ask what happened. When I told her everything, the dinner, the forgery, the threats, she didn't flinch. "They'll always take you for granted if you stay on the ground," she said, pouring tea. "Stand up, and they'll call you tall, like it's an insult." Outside, rain started again. "What should I do?" I asked. She looked at me, eyes steady. "You already did it." 2 weeks later, my father and Derek stood in the middle of the airport, their perfect world unraveling, when a man in a navy suit handed them a thick envelope with my name across it. Summons, official and final. I wasn't there to see it, but Miss Parson texted me one line that said, "Enough. They've been served." I stared at the message, feeling nothing like victory, nothing like guilt, just the quiet relief of someone who finally turned the lights on in a dark room. For the first time, I didn't owe anyone a single thing. When the dust finally settled, the silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. The legal mess untangled exactly the way it should have. Derek's fake loan was voided, his business accounts frozen. My father tried to argue, but every lie left a trail of paper with his signature on it. Miss Parson handled it all with surgical calm. She didn't gloat, and neither did I. Justice doesn't need applause. It just needs to work. I didn't check on them after that. I didn't have to. News traveled through whispers. Derek's business collapsed, my father's credit ruined, my mother avoiding neighbors who finally stopped believing her misunderstood family stories. One night my mother called. I almost didn't pick up, but something in me, the part that still remembered her hands braiding my hair, made me answer. Her voice was softer this time, stripped of performance. "I'm sorry, Jenny," she said, voice breaking. "For all of it. For not protecting you, for letting them use you." I didn't cry. I just listened. When she asked if I'd come to the reunion, I said, "No, Mom. I can forgive you from here." She didn't argue, just whispered, "I love you," and hung up. That night, I sat on my balcony, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like rain. The city lights flickered below, steady and uncaring. I looked at the envelope of receipts on my table, the proof of everything, and slipped it into a drawer. Some truths don't need to be revisited. They just need to exist. I made tea, turned off my phone, and breathed. For the first time in years, peace didn't feel like something I had to buy. It felt like something I'd built with silence, boundaries, and the courage to stop bleeding for people who never noticed the wound. I used to think peace meant everyone getting along. Now I know it means walking away and still wishing them well. My family's reunion went on without me. Their table perfectly set, except for one empty chair in the middle. That space said everything I never had to. If you ever had to choose yourself over people who kept taking, I hope this reminds you silence isn't weakness, it's recovery. Thank you for listening to my story. Tell me where you're watching from and if you've ever had to draw a line with family. Your stories keep this space honest. And don't forget to hit subscribe. There's more truth where this